Welcome to Mid-American Money. I'm Ernie Goss, Professor of Economics and Director of the Economic Forecasting Group here at Creighton University in beautiful downtown Omaha, Nebraska. And today I'm joined by my usual partner in crime, what do I call that, conservative curmudgeon, Tony Hendrickson. And today, very fortunate to be joined by Father Timothy Lannon of the Society of Jesus, who's just inaugurated president of Creighton University. Very happy to have him today. So obviously today we're going to talk about a little bit about the economics of higher education. And so I think it's going to be a great program, so hang on and we'll start. But first let me start by talking about our monthly survey. And for those of viewers that have joined us regularly, you know we first begin by summarizing our monthly survey of supply managers in 9 states, stretching from North Dakota, Minnesota in the north to Oklahoma and Arkansas in the south. We survey about 800 companies, so we get a good I think, snapshot of the economy. So first off, our September survey, after 3 straight months of declines, we had an increase, and that was very surprising, much like the national number, though. Folks, I don't think this is a recession. It just feels like it, especially if you're unemployed, especially if you're in a job where you're seeing little wage growth. Employment, unfortunately, the number dipped below growth neutral for the 2nd month in a row, and of course that's not good. So while we economists say the economy's expanding, jobs aren't there. And for most Americans, they're saying, well, then it's not expanding. I mean, you economists are stuck in the wrong place and looking at it the wrong way. But anyway, business confidence tumbles to its lowest level since the recession, about the middle of the recession, February of '09. And finally, approximately 29% of the businesses, 29%, expect to be laying off in the next 6 months. So I would say the summary of the September survey is the outlook is a heck of a lot worse than what's actually there. In other words, everybody's just gloom and doom, and the economy is really not as bad as that. But anyway, that said, Father Lannon, how do we, the anemic economy, of course, we've all been seeing what's going on in Wall Street with the protests,
Yep.
And is there a disconnect between market economies and human beings? How do you see that?
The protests I find not very surprising in a way, because I think there's a frustration with a lot of our citizens in this country because they're concerned about their livelihoods in the future, and as you pointed out, people are really worried about the situation. What I find interesting though about these protests, though, I don't know if they'll get legs, because I'm not certain what they stand for or any positions that they're presenting. Clearly they're upset by protesting, but it's like, all right, so what is it that you're looking for? Mm-hmm. And I think they need to be a little more helpful with some leadership evolving from among this group.
There's a real reluctance to accept the status quo, yeah. but when you ask what would you like instead, there's an absence of kind of thought of where do we go from here.
So clearly people are frustrated, they're upset, they're concerned, they're nervous. And yet I think for this to get traction, they need to come forward with some type of plan or suggestion that can be considered.
Right. Yeah, and instead of just out with everything, let's sit around the campfire and hope things work out well. And
it's kind of what happens at dinner at my house a lot of nights. My son and I say, "This is what we're going to have," and what else would you like? Well, I don't know. I guess we'll eat this.
More of that, or whatever. More of everything. Well, here's another one. Of course, we're all 3 in higher education, and for those who aren't familiar with what's gone on here at Creighton University, Father Lannon has joined us. We're lucky to get him. He's come back to the heartland. Grew up in Iowa, and was president of St. Joseph University in Philadelphia, and come back to Omaha and the midsection of the country. So welcome back. But
thank you.
We're all involved in higher ed and the economics of higher ed. Is there a lot of more economic pressures? This economy, negative, bad economy, or malaise, affecting higher ed, or how is it affecting?
Well, I think it is. Clearly, I just heard, I think today, and I think I heard correctly, that we're approaching $1 trillion in terms of student debt in this nation. Now, if that number is correct, that's a tremendous number,
Absolutely.
and certainly a huge burden for graduates of our schools, whether public or private schools. And on our part, for example, Creighton University, we provide about $70 million in tuition assistance with our own money. And clearly we want to do more than that if we can. But there is a lot of pressure because I suspect a lot of families will think, can I send my son or daughter to college today? And if so, where? And how much can I afford? And so I think these will be challenging days, to be honest, for higher education, including private higher education. But I think, at least from my perspective, and I think we'd agree to this, from my perspective, though, the quality of the education here is enormous and well worth the investment.
You know, and Tony, I think, would agree with this. And in our classrooms, it's tough for us. It's tough to keep up. I mean, we got technology. Are you blue line, blue cast? And I'm like, wow. I mean, every day. I mean, it used to be a lot easier when we just had the board there, the whiteboard, the chalkboard. Tony can tell you. I mean, well, you can as well, Father.
And there's, you know, I think the thing that sometimes people confuse is there's a difference in getting a degree and getting an education.
Well put.
And I think one of the things is that institutions like ours are certainly focused on getting an education and what that education is going to do for you. You know, one of the things that's always frustrated me is we compare the cost of higher education to the cost of consumer price index, and I think that that's wrong. Certainly, we want to be sensitive to price, but I think for me, what's really driving the increase in tuition is not necessarily an inflation kind of thing, because education's really not a depreciating asset. It should be an appreciating asset. It's more valuable tomorrow than it is
but
to
you got to
today.
stay on top of it. I mean,
so you have
it's
exactly.
Every day it's great. But it is dynamic. It's not
well,
static.
but the reason for the cost, of course, as president
Yes.
of Creighton, in some ways I'm like the mayor of a town.
Yes.
Because we have hotels, which are our residence halls. We have restaurants, which are our dining areas. We have garbage pickup. And also, too, students expect the very best in terms of facilities. And so, as you know so well, the two of you and our viewers know, it's this highly competitive situation with higher ed institutions really competing with each other and building the best buildings ever and the best technology. And so those expenses really do mushroom.
And one other issue I think I would point out is that the cost is driven, I think, because of the return on investment.
Well, look at this. The unemployment rate right now is about a little between 4 and 5% for college graduates. It's 4 times that for a high school dropout. I mean, we're talking about, unfortunately, and for an economist, what we're talking about is we're leaving behind a lot of folks. If we don't, this economic downturn is a lot of people are disinvesting in education.
And
not good.
People realize that I need a college education to succeed. And the numbers you just quoted show that differential in return on investment, and it's that what's driving people to demand more higher education, and hence the higher demand. Back to the law of supply and demand, not the good idea.
It's not a good idea. It's a law, and you know the cost. I mean, as you say, Father, we're at Creighton. We have great facilities. I think in terms of technology.
Yes, yep.
And I think but it's demanding
for
our faculty member and for students, and particularly for administrators who have to find the money for it. Speaking of which, donors now they're under economic duress. Would you? I mean,
no question about it. I think in many ways our donors have been very generous to this university, and I think across the country. You look at the amount of money raised by colleges and universities; it's a very high number of dollars. But at the same time, I think it's all relative, because we can have donors here that have got really wonderful wealth capacity, but ironically, and not surprisingly, they still feel the pinch as well, and they're not as wealthy today as what they were maybe 4 years ago, and so they feel that. So there is that issue as well. But also, it's very interesting, and an issue I think of public policy, is you see these states fighting their way through these challenges and pulling dollars away from higher ed. And I think that is a terrible mistake, not to provide those state dollars, especially for those state schools around the country, to assist those families to educate their sons and daughters. And how many people, to your earlier point, how many people are being left behind now that cannot get that college education because the states have had to pull back? And the issue becomes, well, where can they pull back other than higher education? And we know so well, and you know this as an economist and as a dean, that states are so deeply committed to some of these programs, there's not much wiggle room. they've got.
But you point out it from an agricultural sense, we're eating our own seed corn to some extent
Yes,
by,
yeah, yep.
by not reinvesting that in the
Not
next
to get on the
generation.
politics of it too much, but we've got immigrants that we're now talking about we don't want to educate the immigrants to provide a college education. Very big concern of mine.
Mine too.
I just, and I'm not a politician, but the dialogue or the rhetoric we're hearing is not good in my judgment. To talk about putting people that can't get educated,
Yeah.
And as you're saying, what we call structural unemployment. In other words, we have jobs, but we have people who don't have the skills that match up, and that's what we're talking about. And technology is changing such that in walking into my classroom today versus 15 years ago, it would be a heck of a learning curve.
Right.
I mean, gratefully, it's come slow. Well, not as slow as it needs to.
As you'd like, huh?
I know. You do blue casting, whereby we provide video lectures of students that miss class. I'm like, no, I don't. Well, I've got to learn now. I've missed that. So it has been a tough environment.